بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. To anyone who's watching the recording, or if you're watching this on YouTube, this is the community coaching call that we do in the school community, my digital community. And if you are not a part of the community, but you're a Muslim woman who wants to join, inshallah, the link will be in the description of this video for you to join. So today's topic is all about healing before marriage. And when I was trying to think about how do I want to sort this call out, I was just like, I need something. I need something from the Prophet ﷺ that can be a framework for how we go about healing before marriage. And before we even jump into that hadith, I want to just very briefly talk about why is it even important to consider doing the healing work before marriage. Marriage is considered half our deen, right? And so the hadith about half our deen is something we tend to appreciate, but we take very lightly. And one thing we have to understand, that if marriage is half our deen, then the responsibility and the trials that it comes with are also going to be very heavy. And oftentimes the preparation that we do before getting married is very little in our community, which has honestly proven to be disastrous for us, because there are so many, both men and women, but especially women, who I have come across who have had conversations, whether they've worked with me in coaching or it's just a conversation in passing, where they said, I wish I would have known XYZ before I got married. It would have prevented me a lot of pain. And I think there are a lot of people who can relate to that. If any of you guys can relate to that, or you know someone who's been in that situation where they said, man, if I knew I saw the red flag, but I didn't know how to handle it. If I knew how to ask this question, if I knew that I had this right in Islam, I would have done something differently. If you were someone had that response, just hit the thumbs up, and we'll see how common of a response it is, subhanAllah. With that being said, at the end of the day, marriage is a risk. Marriage is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written for some, not written for others. But we hope that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written for it, that it can be a marriage that is extremely blessed. And my job is to help you to stack the odds in your favor, to do as much as you possibly can, to tie your camel the tightest you can possibly tie it, to make it the most likely that you will have a healthy marriage, a joyful marriage. You will prevent an unsafe, unhealthy, toxic marriage. So with all of that being said, let's jump into how we can do this. So the Prophet ﷺ said, if someone proposes marriage to you whose religion and character satisfies you, then you should accept it. If you do not do so, there will be trials on the earth and the spread of corruption. Now, a lot of people don't know about this hadith. The Prophet ﷺ was actually speaking to fathers in this. So specifically fathers in regard to their daughters, those who have the responsibility of being a wali. How do you use that responsibly for your child, and what should you look for? Well, what's really powerful about this hadith is, although it's speaking to fathers in regards to their daughters, there are two traits that the Prophet ﷺ highlights that can be applied across any Muslim individual who wants to get married, man or woman. We don't talk about that enough, so we're going to talk about it today. What do we need to be doing or working on in order to heal before marriage? If you're someone who's experienced trauma, whether it's childhood trauma, whether it's toxic family dynamics, if it's something where you were previously married and it was a toxic, unhealthy relationship, and now you're recovering from that, work has to be done. So how do we frame this work in a simple way that we know no matter what, this is always going to steer us right? We're never going to fall short if we don't do this. And that is deen and khuluq. So let's start off by talking about the deen aspect. Why do I start here? Because believe it or not, this is the easier one, right? If I was to tell you, how do you improve your deen? Most of you guys are going to have an answer. Pray more. Maybe go to the masjid more often. Maybe listen to more Islamic lectures to gain more Islamic knowledge. Give more sadaqah, do more dhikr, make more dua, right? It is a very easy task to increase yourself in deen. memorize more Quran. We can identify different, even sometimes just ritualistic things, right? Our salah is ritualistic. It's the same, technique every single time. And by doing that, what it happens as we improve our deen? We develop taqwa. What is taqwa? Taqwa is God consciousness. It's an awareness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is constantly with us, constantly watching us, and it purifies our actions. What does taqwa lead to? It leads to submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? It leads to submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by extension, we develop a sincere concern for his creation, especially other people. Now we're going to talk about how this applies and what does this even mean? Because you're like, okay, Hannah, I get it. Deen is important, but how is this helping me heal from trauma? Hang tight, okay? You guys know we don't disappoint here. So now we talk about character. The development of character. There are a lot of people, and actually give me a thumbs up or like a clap if you know someone who has deen, but they severely lack in character. Some of you guys were like real quick. It's very easy to come across people. The Hafid of Quran, right? Who, is just horrible to his parents, right? The person who prays all the time at the masjid, but the way they speak to other people is with such callousness and such rudeness. The woman who, during the Prophet's time, used to fast and pray, but the Prophet said she was in hellfire because of what? Her neighbors weren't safe from her tongue, right? She was lacking in character. Lots of people have deen but don't have character. So I'll talk about character because this is where a lot of the healing, sits. When we develop good character, akhlaq, right? What does this lead to? It leads to good conduct. The way we deal with others is there's khair in it. When we say good, we mean khair. Because of that, we're able to minimize conflict, right? If you are having fights or an argument with someone with good character, it's you. You're the problem, right? And by extension of that, khuluq is, especially like good ikhlaq, is a magnet. It draws out the good in other people. How many times have you been around someone who they're so kind, you're so respectful, you're like, I can't be mean, I can't be rude around this person. It's embarrassing, right? This is really, really powerful. Now, here's the thing about deen and character. They feed into each other. Because if you're truly increasing yourself in deen and you're increasing yourself in taqwa, right? Increasing yourself in taqwa and submitting to Allah, by necessity, your heart softens. And as your heart softens, you maintain better conduct, you minimize conflict, and you draw out the good in others. And you go, one cycles into the other. This is the ideal. Is it not interesting that the Prophet ﷺ didn't just say, look for someone who has deen? That's what we typically say, right? I want someone who has deen. But in fact, and this is something my mentor, when I was getting married, had told me. Like, I called her up and I was like, tell me what to look for. And she was like, character, Hannah. Like, deen, you'll find plenty of people who have deen, but character is what is going to make the difference. Now, still, we're not at the healing part. We're just setting the stage, right? Framing. There's one hadith that I felt really exemplified the power of balancing deen and character and what it does to a human being. And so Aisha, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with her, says that she was on a camel that was misbehaving. And so she started to hit it, right? It's like get it together, right? And the Prophet ﷺ said, you must be gentle. Verily, gentleness is not in anything but that it beautifies it. And it is not removed from anything but that it disgraces it, right? Okay, hold on to this. Gentleness is not in anything except that it beautifies it. And it is not removed from anything but that it disgraces it. I want us to take the word gentleness in this hadith, and in the context of trauma, I want us to replace it with safety. Because for women especially, in order to be gentle, which is a very feminine trait, right? Gentleness is extremely feminine. We require safety. And so, in the context of marriage, if we have not built safety, not just in the marriage, but more specifically in ourselves, i.e., healed from past trauma, then that gentleness doesn't have the stage that it needs to come out. And because you feel unsafe, the gentleness tends to get tossed to the side. And the prophet is telling us that when gentleness is removed from anything, it disgraces it. So safety is a prerequisite to gentleness. Gentleness is a prerequisite to beautifying anything, not just your marriage, but anything, but especially your marriage for women. Is this making sense? Give me a thumbs up if it's making sense, or a heart. Awesome. Okay, perfect. So with all of that now being understood, we have talked extensively about, in other coaching calls, about the nervous system, about establishing safety in the nervous system, right? That sense of safety has to come from a rewiring of the brain that tells us that whatever hurt us in the past will no longer hurt us, right? Whatever it is that we suffered from in the past no longer gets to take over our autonomic nervous system and no longer gets to send us into fight or flight. That's what establishing safety looks like in the nervous system. So I want to introduce you to a concept. Some of you guys might be familiar with it. But when it comes to specifically doing healing work before getting married, I find that this is one of the most effective ways to go about it. It's something called shadow work. So shadow work, some of you guys might already have done it. Some of you guys might not be familiar with the term, but you're like, oh, wait, I've been doing this, right? Shadow work is essentially an understanding that each and every single one of us, especially due to difficult life circumstances, whether it was trauma or otherwise, have a side to ourselves that is not reflective of our highest good, right? It's our nafs, essentially. And when it comes to the time before entering a marriage, if we don't get a hold of the shadow side of ourselves, it is going to come out. And now when you add trauma on top of that, right, naturally it will come out. But when you add trauma on top of that, what happens? It coming out becomes automatic. You don't get a hold on it. Why? Because you switch off into fight or flight when you don't feel safe. Your gentleness goes out the window. And then damage there's damage to the relationship. And sometimes you're not even aware of it happening because it is so automatic. Your fight or flight system is a reflexive system, right? So how do we use shadow work to be able to support healing trauma before marriage? Remember the hadith that we talked about? Deen and character. Everyone can sit there. It's easy to assess where you're at in deen, right? If I was to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, everyone would be able to rate themselves. They know exactly, yeah, I struggle with my salah. I miss fajr. I haven't touched the Quran in a really long time. I feel like I'm not as generous as I should be. It's very easy. What is difficult and has more implication on your marriage is your character. So shadow work, one of the best ways to do it is through journaling. But when you're journaling, you need to know what you're journaling. You need to ask yourself the right questions, do the correct exploration, and be willing to go deep. If you're not willing to do that, a lot of people will do journaling, but they're not going deep enough to actually uncover what's at the source of these character issues that needs to be healed. So we're going to go through a kind of like a system. So these are questions you can write down for yourself. And then when you have your own time, kind of go through the journaling sequence and then say what you find. So number 1 is, what are the gaps in your character? Another way to think about this is character flaws. And when you do this, just be very frank with yourself. Be very honest. Not like anyone is gonna read this. What I find is, and what ends up being very destructive because it lacks muhasaba, right? The Umar ibn al-Khattab used to say, hasibu anfusakum, like take account of yourself before you're taken to account. Meaning, Be self-reflective. Be okay with calling yourself out. We tend to be very generous in our accounting of ourselves, especially when we're getting to know someone for marriage or we're putting ourselves out there for marriage. This is not a time to be generous. This is the time to get down and dirty about what am I lacking? What are the gaps in your character? Are you impatient? Do you not think well of others? By the way, some of these character flaws are gendered. The Prophet ﷺ actually talked about how for women, one of the things we really struggle with is seeing good in other people. Right? There was this very specific um that's what someone said, that's where check yourself before you wreck yourself comes from. Yeah, that's a good extension or a good metaphor. So that's one thing that we really struggle with is seeing the good in others. And that's actually one of the reasons why a lot of women end up in hellfire, right? Because when you don't see good in others, you're more likely to harm them. So what are these character flaws? Are you impatient? Do you not have husn al-dhan of other people? You don't see good in others? Do you lie? Are you not trustworthy? Are you arrogant? List them all out, even if there's just a little teeny bit. Maybe you're impatient. That's like your 4 out of 5 character flaw. But maybe there's also just a little ounce of I'm not always honest, right? Once you've identified those, you're going to have a nice list. That's what this little checkboard was supposed to represent. Okay. Now we get to the really deep parts of the shadow work. Okay. Character flaws don't just come out of nowhere. You're not born with it, right? Well, okay, I shouldn't say that because kids can actually be very rude. There's still a huge element of nurture when it comes to these traits. So here's what you have to explore. Number 1 is, what are the sources? These character flaws that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where does it come from? You literally can just write like this one comes from my father, right? My father's super impatient, so I'm super impatient, right? It might be that there's a specific event. Oh, I remember in 5th grade, this thing happened. And since that time, I really struggled with being honest because I got in trouble when I was honest. I don't care what it is. Just put it down, right? When you know those sources are events that are embedded in our memory that are subconsciously impacting our behaviors. You need to know what the source is. If you can't identify a source, that's okay. Sometimes you can kind of assume maybe it's from this, maybe it's from that. You can write those down as well. The next question to ask are, what are the triggers? Nobody just walks out and like starts lying, right? You're going to like, I don't know, get coffee and the guy asks, do you want sugar in this? And you're like, no, I don't want sugar. Just kidding, right? People don't just start doing their toxic traits or their, demonstrating their character flaws. What triggers it? When you're impatient, what makes you impatient? Are you impatient with yourself? Like if you're slow to get something done, do you freak out, or is someone else is involved that your impatience gets triggered? Identify these triggers. Your triggers say a lot about you. They say a lot about what you're allowing to control you. When you're identifying the triggers, do it with compassion. We've talked about this a lot. You need to come to the understanding that your this might not be trauma response, but your triggers are trying to serve a function. They're trying to lead you to certain behaviors that serve a purpose. And so you don't shame the purpose, just we recognize that the trigger might not be the best, or the way we go about it might not be the best, but come to it with self-compassion. It's really important because that allows your nervous system to maintain some calmness to actually do what needs to be done. Now, here's the thing. There are some characteristics that they're just weaknesses. You grew up with someone who everyone in your family is really loud, and so you're loud. That's actually not necessarily a weakness. I guess it depends on when it comes up, but just as an example, right? Or maybe let's say interrupting. This is the big one. A character flaw is interrupting. I used to have it. You might come from a family where people just interrupt and it's normal. It's not a big deal. Conversation, you butt in, this person butts in. It's not good edep. But we can recognize it's not because of trauma. It's just because of nurture. This is how people around me grew up. But then there are character flaws that come from deep-rooted trauma. And these are the ones we have to watch out for. You'll know pretty quickly which ones come from deep-rooted trauma as long as you're going through that sequence of the questioning when you're journaling, okay? Why is it important to know the difference? Because I say this all the time. If you've ever been coached by me, you might have heard this come out of my mouth. Different problems have different solutions. Even when they might appear the same, right? The manifestation of this character flaw might look the same. If they're coming from two different places, we address them differently. So let's talk about character flaws that are just weaknesses. Okay, all you have to do is practice the better alternative over and over again until finally you extinguish. This is what the word is in psychology, extinguish the previously conditioned response. So when I realized when someone called me out on the fact that I interrupt all the time, I was like, dang, I didn't even realize I do interrupt a lot. Like my friend couldn't even finish a sentence before I was like, oh, and me too, right? And it's just because I enjoyed the conversation. And so I had to start practicing. I had to start, okay, let them finish the sentence. And I remember literally, I was like thinking so hard. I'm gonna let them finish the sentence. And then I'm going to say something. And then eventually it just got very easy to stay quiet until someone finished and jump in. And every now and then when I do get a little overzealous and excited in a conversation, or if a conversation is getting heated, and then that's another time when you're very likely to interrupt, if the other person says, oh, you're interrupting me, or I didn't finish what, I can be like, oh, you're right. Okay, cool. And the letting them finish speaking, that part switches on in my brain, and we can practice good edit by that. Trauma is very different. You can't just extinguish the trauma response. You have to deal with the trauma at the root of it. Because while our general weaknesses or our general character flaws just come from a fact that the healthier alternative hasn't been conditioned enough, the characteristics that are a result of trauma come from the fact that there is a lack of safety in the nervous system that is connected to certain experiences that our autonomic nervous system is trying to protect us through that. So we can't just turn it off, because it's almost like it's like taking the fire extinguisher out of a house that might catch on fire. Like you'd freak out if someone was doing that, right? So how do we deal with that? So number one, we talked about this already, but we need to create self-compassion and safety. There needs to be a tremendous amount of self-compassion. You cannot hate yourself out of trauma. You can't beat yourself up out of trauma. You need to be kind, right? And safety. Safety is the nervous system regulation we talked about a lot. And when we've introduced that self-compassion and safety, now our automatic, like the subconscious parts of us and the more automatic parts of us are more willing to let us in, right? Next is, this is really important. As you're reflecting on these different responses and you now know where they come from, well, in order to introduce safety, you need to identify disconfirming experiences. You might remember this word from another coaching call we had. I don't remember if it was the second one or which one it was. But disconfirming experiences are experiences that signal to our subconscious that the things that we once thought were unsafe are actually safe. So as an example, let's say you get very defensive when someone criticizes you, or someone says something that you even just interpret as a criticism. It might not actually be a criticism. You get very defensive and very fiery. Okay. Let's say that is rooted in trauma because you had extremely critical parents who were emotionally abusive, and nothing you ever did was right, and you were just in constant anxiety of what's going to be the next thing they point out to show that I'm worthless or I'm not good enough, right? Which can really, I think people underplay how damaging this can be psychologically to a human being and the extent of anxiety it can cause. So that's your okay, let's go back up here. This is a good way to, okay. The character flaw is that you get very defensive The source is childhood emotional and psychological criticism and abuse. What triggers it? When someone says something that you perceive as a criticism, right? And is it from rooted in trauma, or is it just a weakness? It's rooted in trauma. Cool. Now we understand. We need to identify disconfirming experiences, right? So we come to it, self-compassion, safety. I understand that this came from the fact that as a child, I just wanted to be seen and I wanted to feel like I was good enough for my parents, as an example. And I just didn't want to mess up anymore. And so the anxiety and the constant reaction to criticism is because it makes me feel like I don't belong and that I'm doing something wrong, and I don't want to feel like that anymore. So we have the self-compassion. This is creating safety, disconfirming experiences. Okay, when someone criticizes me, there are probably people who give critiques, but it's not given in a way to hurt us. Maybe it's a boss who says, "Oh, you do it like this. This is actually a better way to do it." And it's in those moments where you now identify, okay, this is a criticism, but disconfirming experience. It is not proving that I'm worthless. It's not proving that I'm less than. It's not proving that I'm not good enough. I'm going to just see this as an opportunity to improve this skill set and nothing more, right? That's it. Hannah, this is about, so I work at a clinic. We have a very weird electronic medical record system. I'm still learning it. So sometimes the other provider will come and be like, oh, here's a faster way to do XYZ. Now, instead of being like, oh, but I was taught it like this and automatically getting defensive or trying to over explain myself, I just say, oh, thanks. Cool. Appreciate it. And maybe I decide to use that new way, or maybe I don't. That doesn't matter. As we identify and confirm these disconfirming experiences, what's happening? We're building a new identity. Because here's the thing, trauma shapes our identity. So if as a child, you felt like your worth was based on how well you did something because of all the criticism you got, and you felt like you couldn't ever do anything right, you always needed someone else's approval. Well, these disconfirming experiences are helping you build a new identity of, no, I'm actually someone who's autonomous and can do things that are right. Actually someone who can figure things out for themselves, and it's okay if I make a mistake. And what do new identities do? They build new beliefs. They help untangle old trauma, because that old trauma the protective mechanisms that stem from the old trauma are no longer needed because you're a new person, right? And it slowly helps it helps them to loosen up and fizzle out, basically. Okay. So that is our kind of educational part of the coaching for today. I wanted to share something with you guys, inshallah, that I'm super excited about. I did not initially, and when I first decided this topic for this month's community coaching call, I didn't actually think about doing what I'm about to do. But I figured this would actually be a perfect opportunity to present this, and you guys are the first to know about it, inshallah. So why is it dangerous to not do this work? Obviously, the implications of not doing the healing before marriage is we throw ourselves into a relationship which is an extremely intimate and complex relationship without the proper tools to be able to navigate it. There is such a high likelihood for anyone who's experienced trauma to identify spouses who are actually a reflection of their own inner wounds, right? Or you've attracted someone to you because they see the wounds that are unhealed and they want to take advantage of it. It's really, really scary when you think about it. In addition, let's say you did get someone who is a really great person and they're a healthy individual, but you've not yet done the healing. Well, it creates space for self-sabotage, right? And people can only take things for so long before they eventually say no. Even the kindest and most caring person can only handle so much. There's one person I think about on Instagram who I used to follow. She has borderline personality disorder. She's not Muslim, but she had gotten married and she regularly posted about how healing her marriage was, how how healthy it was, how amazing it was. And I remember just because of what I know of this work, I remember thinking one day, I don't think this is going to last. And one day I unfollowed her at one point, and then one of her reels popped up, and I learned they were in the process of a divorce or a separation. And I had thought to myself, part of why I anticipated that it wasn't going to last is because as much as she's seeing the marriage as a healing for herself, she was not doing the healing outside of that. And that person could only take so much before they're absorbing the negativity and the toxicity and the pain that a traumatized individual puts out because they're neglecting their own healing. So with that being said, and for anyone who is watching this on YouTube, this is an announcement for you as well. That's why I'm filming it. I want to introduce to you guys Reattached, an accelerated coaching program for unmarried Muslims. So this is a project that I've been working on. If you guys were here earlier in the coaching community, I actually put out a request saying who would be interested in something like this. And I got tons of responses in the community and also on YouTube. So this program has a goal to combine 8 hours of coaching and premarital education to help unmarried Muslims heal before marriage. So we are able to promote healthy marriages, loving and joyful marriages, and also most importantly, divorce-proof the marriage. And when I say divorce-proof, I mean reduce as significantly as we possibly can the likelihood that you will end up divorced by helping you identify a spouse that is not going to be someone who is just going to, throw the towel in as soon as things go wrong. And also to ensure that we are at the healthiest level that we can be to be able to nurture that, right? So what does this include? This program includes 8 hours of coaching and premarital preparation learning. The program is extensive. As I've been building it out, my thought process is, what is it that Muslims who have experienced trauma never learned? Before I got married, had been to so many premarital workshops. I had read so many premarital books. I still have them. I went through so many videos, and I was just like, this is great, but none of this helps someone who's experienced trauma that's going to affect their relationship. And so I built that out. And actually, something a lot of people don't know about me is before I did trauma coaching, I actually did premarital coaching. And I actually had a workshop. It was a 2-hour workshop where we would do premarital. It was premarital education, essentially. And the comment I regularly got from people who attended these workshops, these were people who had gone to all the marriage lectures, who read the books, was, I've never been to a workshop like this. I've never learned what you just taught us, right? So what does it include? 8 hours of coaching and premarital preparation learning. The coaching aspect is an interactive coaching Q&A. So as things come up, as you're reflecting, after a session, you're always able to come back with powerful questions that are unique to you. So you get coaching that is actually going to serve you and what you need. There are going to be, inshallah, activities for integration. A lot of people ask me, Hannah, what did you do before you got married to ensure that, inshallah, you're in a healthy place to be married? And so I actually put those together, and those would be shares. There are also several bonuses, inshallah. So I want to quickly go through the modules. So what are the modules? So module number 1, and each of these modules have several different aspects to them and different lessons, but to summarize them. Module number 1 is all about learning about trauma, how trauma affects the premarital process and marriage success, and then working on rewiring deep-rooted relational trauma. So what are the actual traumas that are going to affect the way you show up in your marriage, period? I don't care how strong-willed you are. I don't care how excited or hopeful you are. Your trauma is going to affect your marriage. If you do not do the work beforehand, you're shooting yourself in the foot, because at a time where things are more controlled, you can do the work, right? But once you're thrust into marriage and there's emotions and there's emotional, mental, spiritual, physical intimacy, things get really muddied and it can be difficult to do the work. That's module 1. Module number 2 is learning all about attachment theory, relational self-sabotage, and how to divorce-proof your marriage. Attachment theory is something you might have heard about, but the way we frame it is actually not just, hey, this is what your attachment style is, but how do you actually heal your insecure attachment to ensure that you get back to a place where your attachment is healthy and you're able to see your spouse as someone that you grow with, you nurture a healthy relationship with, rather than you being dependent or open to harm. Module number 3 is all about rebuilding intuition and what to do to actually look for in a spouse for a successful marriage. This is something that's severely lacking in marriage education. I'm in a group. It's kind of scary when I see this. I'm in a group and I use it really for research. Obviously, I'm married, so I don't need it, alhamdulillah. Where essentially women who are, getting married will share kind of like this is what they're looking for in someone. And it honestly blows my mind at how fundamentally flawed the qualities are that an individual looks for in a spouse. And it is scary how these are women who are very smart, who have great careers, who have access to deep knowledge. And yet I'll look at the comments and I'll be like, this is what you're looking for, or this was a red flag to you. This wasn't a red flag, baby girl. This was a green flag. This is actually something you should be looking for, right? But it's so convoluted. And so the whole idea with this module is let's rebuild our frame and our lens through which we identify what's healthy and what's actually a green flag, what's actually a red flag, right? Intuition is really important because intuition is something that gets lost with trauma. Intuition is something that gut feeling that you have, trauma distorts it. And what you think is a gut feeling is actually a trauma response and attracting you to things that are familiar and not necessarily things that are good for you. And that's what a lot of people tend to use to identify their spouses. I had butterflies when I met them. You didn't have butterflies because they were amazing. You had butterflies because something was actually triggering your anxiety. And you learned that later on, but it was too late by that time. The last module is my favorite because I don't want you to just leave with the sense of fear of, oh my God, like it's going to be so hard to find someone. Module 4 is all about looking at the Prophet ﷺ and Khadija radiallahu anha's marriage as a case study, not just a story, but what are the qualities, what are the routines, what are the things that we can extract, almost like a research project, to apply to our own marriages. And what are the things that we can extract from each of these individuals? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with them, to work on ourselves and just level up where we are, right? And then lastly, what are the tools to protect your marriage from trauma wounds? This is also where we're doing some vision building around marriage. So there are a few bonuses that do come with this. Okay. So the first bonus is actually something I created a while ago, but I never released it, which is a 52-page premarital preparation workbook. This truly in and of itself is easily worth $80. And I don't exaggerate because when I created this workbook, I literally thought, what is everything that someone needs to know? And then made it as interactive as possible. Inshallah, I'm also preparing a list of questions to ask before marriage. These are not just the typical, what's your favorite color? What do you do for work? But the types of questions that allow you to dig deep and really see the crux of who a person is, their deen, their character, how they handle conflict, what is the trauma that's going to show up in their life. And lastly, inshallah, if you join live, because this is basically the only time that I intend to do this program live. After that, the recordings are going to go up and it's going to become a course, is you get access to the educational recordings after the program is over. Okay. So how much would a program like this cost? In general, for a program like this, 8 hours of coaching, for those of you guys who already have worked with me, you kind of know how I price things. Typically, it would be $1,200 per person, right? That would be the cost of the program, or the investment, I should say. But I wanted to make it as accessible as possible. So it's not going to be $1,200. Inshallah, that is the price that I intend, right? $300 per person. But because I knew I was going to be sharing this with the community first, and inshallah, the YouTube channel first, were the first people that actually started following my work. It won't be $300. But inshallah, until November 1st, it'll be $250 per person. That is for access to all the live meetings, the course, the digital workbook, and the questionnaire. And with that being said, there are only 99 spots left or open at all. So that's all I have for this. I want to put that out there. If you are someone who's interested in this, there's no payment link as of yet. If you're interested, shoot your email in the chat for this, or you can message it to me. Your best bet is to do it now. If you have already done a coaching program with me, meaning if you've been in my group coaching program, or you have booked more than one session with me, you get access to this for free. This is just a thank you, inshallah, for investing the time and effort. So I will copy and paste these emails. And for anyone who is watching this on YouTube, if you are interested in this and you want to book it before the spots run out, because I do anticipate 99 spots for 250, which I never do, is going to run out very quickly. Make sure you go to the link in the description to book your spot, inshallah. And that's basically it for this. Assalamu alaikum. You guys stay on the call. But for anyone watching on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful. Drop your comments, inshallah, below. And we're going to stop the recording here.